Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. Thanks so much for asking. Hope all the listeners are doing fantastic as well. This is a great conversation with a little bit of an update on our continuing coverage of this rumored phenomenon that's happening in the New England area. But Tim, before we get to that, how are you?
Doing good over here. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, so this conversation that we're about to play with Professor David Perlmutter aired on Crawlspace just recently in June of 2025. We have been covering the story of this New England serial killer, which, you know, it's at least a story. I don't know if there's really a killer or serial killers out there connecting these bodies, but that's kind of what we're exploring in this series. This is kind of a bonus episode, I guess you could say, because most of this was aired previously on Crawlspace, and we go over sort of the coverage of this New England serial killer with David Perlmutter, and that is really his specialty, as he is a professor at Texas Tech, and he covers media and communications. One thing we didn't speak about in this conversation was this missing man named Eric Wein, and he was 31, and he went missing on April 18th, and his car was parked illegally, actually, in South Kingston, Rhode Island, on April 10th. And so he was reported missing on April 18th. He was just identified as the human remains that were found that were located near Taylor Swift's mansion in Rhode Island. And so that news broke on June 13th of 2025.
So at the time of this particular recording, we're looking at about a week since that news broke. But in regards to the conversation that we had with Professor Perlmutter, we're talking about media coverage of this and how the media is turning this into a story that maybe shouldn't be a story. But like you said, it is a story, regardless of what the actual outcome might be or might not be. But we were looking into any updates on the New England serial killer, and it only seems like recently did they start to publish Eric Wein's name alongside with Taylor Swift and the body that was discovered around her property in Rhode Island. Before that, there was this article that was written by Stephen Peterson of the Sun Chronicle, and it has no mention of Taylor Swift. It has no mention of a New England serial killer. And it is an announcement that the body that washed ashore in mid-May in Rhode Island is confirmed to be that of a missing Mansfield man, Eric A. Wein, 31. So that is the first line in the article. Again, no mention of Taylor Swift, no mention of the New England serial killer, and this was written on June 13th, like you said.
Yeah, so in the conversation with David Perlmutter, we kind of give a little bit of crap to the journalists who write the articles that include Taylor Swift's name with that missing man, Eric Wein, his remains being found near her house. But in this scenario, this news actually would have traveled faster had Stephen included Taylor Swift or the New England serial killer, because we kind of Google New England serial killer every day or so, and this didn't come up until I searched for Eric Wein separately. So yeah, it's interesting. So I almost feel bad about giving the journalists in the conversation with David Perlmutter a little bit of crap, because while Stephen Peterson wrote this article for the Sun Chronicle and wrote it very ethically, I would say, didn't try to be sensational at all, but I feel like it would have traveled faster had he done that, just a little bit. So it's definitely an interesting thing, and you can weigh one direction or another with doing something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's a great addition to the conversation that we had, and is pretty evident that the intent was not to have this information travel so fast, because probably wanted to keep it as a public announcement, but didn't want that name to get caught up in all of these rumors that likely weren't true, because we don't know the circumstances of Mr. Wein's demise. So the family should know this. Law enforcement should know this. The media did exactly what the media should have done. The journalist who wrote this article for the Sun Chronicle, Stephen Peterson, did exactly what he should have done, which was report facts based on this missing person report. He didn't add anything speculative, and the purpose was to get the conclusion out there for who the identity was. It's almost irrelevant that it's at a celebrity's home and, circulates among the headlines with a New England serial killer rumor. So I round of applause for that bit of journalism, not looking to get the sensationalized headline or even getting it to be out there in the public on a wide scale, because that obviously wasn't the purpose. Because they had the option to do so. I mean, somebody in that newsroom was like, that body that was found at Taylor Swift's property is this guy. And then they made the decision to not lead with that. So good for them.
And so there was this article from usmagazine.com, Us Weekly actually. They spoke with Eric Wein's good friend, Nicole LaBouffe, and she exclusively spoke with Us Weekly, and she said, "We have no idea what happened or where the rest of him is. Presumably, he is no longer with us, but without those answers, it's hard to move on." And really interesting that Eric, before he disappeared, actually told his employer that he was taking a week off due to unforeseen circumstances and that he would be back on Sunday. And he obviously didn't return. But his friend LaBouffe said they were hoping he was going to see a girl. But yeah, that obviously isn't what happened.
Well, it is a really tragic story. Like you said before, his car was parked illegally. It says here as well, abandoned at the end of a residential street on that street. So whatever happened pretty locally. And beyond that, we really don't have much. I'm sure on that street, there are security cameras that homes have outside of their communities. I can imagine that there's some sort of security footage from homes that police are looking into now. But again, if we're told by law enforcement, which we are, that his death is not being ruled as suspicious, then where do we go from here with the New England serial killer?
Right. Well, this is another bit of remains located that is seemingly not suspicious, not to be counted among any suspicious deaths that are grouped in with the New England serial killer story.
And just to quote Police Chief Matthew Moynihan from the South Kingston Police Department, he says, "Our department has expressed condolences to the family, and the investigation into the matter has concluded."
So there you have it.
Yeah.
Certainly no more investigation into Eric Wein's disappearance. Seems like his family and friends aren't exactly satisfied, but I don't know. It seems like Eric must have been going through some tough days. I'm guessing he is an ex-Marine, and yeah, he blocked a driveway when he abandoned his car there on that residential street, which was kind of interesting, almost like he wanted the police to get called or something. But yeah, so condolences to Eric Wein's family and friends. So this part of the story of the New England serial killer can be put to bed. Okay, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Professor David Perlmutter from Texas Tech University. Very interesting conversation, and he's a return guest. We've had him on several times now. Hope you enjoy these conversations.
And hey, if you're curious to know what he looks like, you can watch this on Spotify. And if you've never seen what Tim and I look like, you can watch that on Spotify too. I mean, we probably won't let you down, but give it a shot.
We might.
we might, but that's the risk you run.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Please follow us on social media at Missing CSM. We're going to break quick for commercial, and we'll be right back with Dr. and Professor David Perlmutter. Welcome back to the podcast, David Perlmutter. David, how are you today?
Very good, sir. How are you?
We're doing great. We're so happy to have you on because we're going to be talking about this seemingly constantly developing story about a rumored active serial killer lurking, terrorizing the streets and coastal towns here in New England. And hopefully, with your insight and expertise, we can maybe effectively shoot some holes in this and watch this New England serial killer boat sink to the bottom. But before we get to that, for those who don't know who we're talking to, can you just give a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. I'm a professor at Texas Tech University, and long ago I wrote a book called Policing the Media about the relationship of law enforcement, including investigation of crimes and street law enforcement, basically whatever's covered in the show Law and Order, both sides of law enforcement, and people, their clients, the suspects, witnesses, victims, the public, and media. And I was very interested at that time because, and I think that this has simply increased, there were some numbers that police and law enforcement were the most overrepresented profession in the media. There were more characters on television who were in the world of law enforcement or even the private detective world than there were in real life as a ratio. And this is a complete aside, but I was looking at some of the cable services and some of the streaming services, and it feels like 90% of the content are mysteries or detective shows. I mean, that's probably not factually true, but it just feels like it. Just endless mystery shows. Apparently, every small town in all of the United Kingdom, and Wales and Britain and Scotland, every island has their own detective show. I did not know, for example, that there's a mass murder in the Shetlands every week. But if you watch the Shetlands long-running mystery show on BBC or BritBox, apparently that's the case. This island of 22,000 people where there's hardly any murders. But we are as a people, like a planet, we are obsessed with mystery and murder. So this is how I came to it. And I really enjoy talking about the media coverage and what you're leading up to, which is the story which may not be an actual story. It may be a completely fictive story, but it's interesting in itself.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's certainly got like a cultural hold over a lot of folks who are looking into this, certainly folks in New England, but I think people all over the world are interested in this. And depending on where you sort of begin and end your timeline in looking at this New England serial killer story, you may have somewhere between 12 and 16 bodies as a part of this overall story. And no law enforcement agent has said that any single case is connected to another. So just want to start by mentioning that. This is pretty much completely social media and I guess traditional media driven so far. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, this is yet another example of a case or a story that exists in two worlds. The forensic world of like what's actually happening, where you read, it's probably true that I'm reading from my notes here. On April 25th in Taunton, Massachusetts, the body of Samuel Stovall, 51, recovered from the Mill River. Death deemed not suspicious. Okay, that's a huge simplification of a news story, right? But then there's this other world, which we don't know there's any match at all, where 10th victim of serial killer found, communities terrified, will he strike, will he or she or they strike again? They might be related, sort of like a Venn diagram. That like the circles might overlap, and then they might be completely different circles. I was listening to a podcast, a really good one, about the Jack the Ripper murders. Now, have you ever done an episode on Jack the Ripper?
Well, not directly, but I'm honestly shocked that you were listening to another podcast aside from Crawlspace.
Well, actually, I was listening to the future. You're going to be doing one. And I get a special service where I can listen to future podcasts.
Oh, wow, cool.
So
Then yes, we have covered it.
you will do a great job. Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
But anyway, it was interesting because the person who was an expert, if there can be an expert in something that old, they were going through the evidence and they were saying almost every piece of evidence is suspect. That like every single thing you think you know about Jack the Ripper, including Jack the Ripper, and that this murder was associated with another murder, if it was subjected to today's forensic investigation, it might come up empty. We always have to have this hesitation to proclaim something. And again, this goes back to television because we are used to in the last generation and a half, certainly the time younger folks like you have grown up, of the CSI effect, which you've talked about in a lot of shows, not just with me, where we expect this super science understanding of every criminal case and that we'll know every detail when we know there's a lot of mystery out there and unresolved things. And some of these cases are resolved, but the part that's not resolved is whether they're linked in any way.
As far as we know, there's been no detail that law enforcement has had that they've ever said that they're holding back. And I said that in a really clunky way, but when we have read the articles about each one of the bodies found, there's nothing in there that suggests that law enforcement is withholding any information because they feel like there's a suspect that connects all of the bodies.
I listened to your previous podcasts on this, and you've made a bunch of points that I just feel I could build on, but not trying to contradict. The rumor engine was always around. Like, again, you go back to the era of the newspaper with Jack the Ripper. And then I listened to your great podcast where you interviewed someone, an actress who'd written a play about the Black Dahlia case. And she talked about how many facts associated, I'm doing sarcastic finger bunnies here, air quotes, how many facts associated with the case just aren't true. They were literally made up by a newspaper, to spice the story up. The rumor mill on Reddit and Facebook and other social media are creating these alternative realities. We do have to step back and say, there's a non-zero chance maybe there is a relationship between some of them. I'm going to be confident and say that I don't think all of them could possibly be related, but it's possible a few are related. The area is not that large, right? I mean, this is a ranch in Texas.
Yes, exactly.
where these people were killed. It's a large area for your neck of the woods there. Viewing from Texas, it doesn't seem. It seems like a really tiny area. So yeah, there's different dead people there, but you've had guests before talking about how many unsolved murders there are, right?
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, there's a good likelihood on any particular day, if you just go wandering around in the woods and dig around, you're going to find something, especially when it's near a major city, right?
Yeah, of course. And especially if you have an area of land that is close to some historic cemetery or graveyard. And a lot of the areas out here, there was plenty of burial grounds that I'm sure were unmarked. You do hear stories about remains that are found, and it's determined to be very ancient remains, and you can assume that it was remains that were there previously, or I don't know what it's called, but like they're washed out, under the ground, and they end up in a different area. Imagine that if these ancient bones were found, and then some reporter, some journalist wanted to spice up that story and started connecting ancient bones to current bodies and started telling a story about how a family for generations has been killing people in New England. Because that's about as responsible as what's happening now. Like, if they found a body that was from 1750, they could look at lineage in Massachusetts and be like, it could be the Pilleri family for hundreds of years.
It wasn't the Pilleri family. I'll say that right here.
Yeah, and of course, we live in an age of deep belief in a lot of supernatural. So simply pointing out that the bodies are hundreds of years apart, well, vampire serial killer, obviously at loose in Framingham.
I mean, clearly, not just loose, but stalking the streets.
We've talked about this before, and there's another podcast I love doing. You do more than you, but I love you guys. But there's a great podcast, I guess an adjacent topic. Carl Maimer has the Conspiracy Skeptic podcast, and I enjoy being on there. And we talk about how one of the challenges, once a rumor, an explanation, a conspiracy gets established, even if it's based on certain pieces of evidence and those pieces of evidence go away, I mean, they're just proven not to be true, people move the goalpost to the next one. So, if you say like, yeah, these two murders are similar, but they were committed 200 years apart. Well, obviously somebody would say that's evidence of immortal serial killers, right? So I don't know how you would ever shut this down. I guess it'll fade out, or either some evidence will be found that, again, prove some connection between some, or I guess the story will just fade out and enter internet lore.
I don't know if it will fade out because we have a couple more bodies that were found. And it seems like, at least in one of these articles that we were looking at least this one article, maybe two articles on the latest body that was recovered, it's like it's been pulled backwards. It's like all of the work to try to dispute it is just being discarded, and certain journalists, and I use the term loosely, are just playing really irresponsibly with the details. Even though there's more information there, but they give you just enough so you can say, oh my goodness, how are they ignoring the serial killer? If you just put two more sentences there, you could easily discount it. And we'll get into the specifics on that, but I don't know if it's going to go away.
Yeah, I don't know either, because the smiley face killers is still kind of out there online, and that was never proven to be anything substantial or real. And this is kind of following the same template in a big way, I think. Does this count as conspiracy, David?
Well, yeah, I mean, everything is, isn't it? We live in a world where no event can happen without a Reddit page being created and 12,000 people talking about the conspiracy. And I think that's sort of the situation I think we're in now. Is we have the worst of the tendencies of old industrial media and the most, let's just say, unregulated tendencies of new social media and the economic situation. Let's face it, you see the headlines, and some of these headlines are not from like Joe on the internet. They're from like actual newspapers, or what used to be newspapers or television stations. The financial situation is pretty desperate. Journalism used to be a very profitable profession. If you ran a town newspaper in the 1960s, you were making 30% profit, right? And now a lot of that's gone away. And so you can understand there's a battle in the soul of like journalistic integrity, and also like we got to get clicks, right? So that's why I think you get these stories like mystery deepens of alleged serial killer. So you've covered yourself by using the word alleged, but you're still getting the clicks of people thinking, oh, really? There's like a serial killer, right? Very few of the headlines I found said, nothing to see here, move along. Yep, one person's dead. We'll do that story. Stop reading us about the no serial killer, right? They won't do that because people click on serial killer, body found, everything explained. That's not going to get as many clicks as I was reading one story. Are serial killer rumors in New England based on fact or fear? I tell my students, never write a headline like that. God bless whoever wrote that headline. You see why they're getting points on both sides there. They can point at their journalistic integrity at the same time they're getting the click. Yeah.
Now, why would you tell your students not to write a headline like that?
It's become such a template for pseudoscience. Did UFOs kill Lincoln? If you have any integrity, the story itself should say, no, there's no evidence whatsoever that UFOs killed Abraham Lincoln. But I see a lot of science communicators who do shows about science and against pseudoscience, and they feel they're forced by the algorithm of YouTube, of Google, of ChatGPT, of all social media platforms to have what we used to call lurid headlines. Maybe we need to bring the word lurid back. The algorithm does not like boring statements of fact.
Could you have a reasonable attempt to create the content behind the clickable headline be accurate? Because I would be fine with someone saying, is there a serial killer stalking the streets or coastal towns of New England? Sex up that headline, like make it clickable. But the content could be about as responsible as you'd want it to be, as long as you've opened the door to the reader. I just want to give one quick example of one of the articles that was most recently written about the most recent body that was discovered. And Tim and I have made it a concerted effort to not mention a certain body that has been found, because the family has been screaming from the rooftops that this is not connected to any serial killer, and any mention and any promotion of this theory could possibly impact the actual case that's going on, because they are pretty sure they know what happened. So we've been trying our best to not mention this name. And they put that statement out there months ago. And this new article has no problem showing that woman's picture, giving her name and giving her age and just putting it right back out there. So why is there no responsible content behind the clickable, bait-clicky headline?
You've raised a bunch of interesting points. If you recall, I first contacted you two because I was looking for examples of my students of responsible mystery podcasts and studies, independent journalism, independent content creation. And I felt that you two absolutely fell and fall under that category, and including sensitivity to families and victims, which you started out with the Maura Murray case, and I think you've continued through all of your work. Your deep respect that we're talking about people here, and things we say can hurt living people. And let's add also the legacy and memory of dead people. And again, your excellent podcast with the young woman who wrote the play about the Black Dahlia talked about how, she's been defamed by history and created into something that she wasn't, and circumstances that didn't exist. And if anything, her killer, whoever it was, has been probably gotten more good publicity. Bad headlines, lurid headlines, misleading headlines, separately from the content of the story, that's something to talk about. But we should emphasize that the lurid headline can do damage to people and to people's memory.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
I also just want to point out, we did take the wishes of the family, but I guess you don't have to. If you're the journalist who wrote that latest article, even if you didn't see what the family said about that, technically speaking, we don't know that the family's right. They're probably right, but, they're much closer to the investigation than we are. I suppose I could see a journalist's side and say, well, we don't know for sure, so we're going to include it.
Yeah, the don't know for sure in terms of journalistic ethics, which also we've talked about before. We don't know for sure that UFOs were not involved, right? I mean, science can't prove a negative. There's always a non-zero chance that something which some of us might consider to be crazy is true. Going back to the phrasing, in science, there are rules about how you phrase the title of an article, where you should not in any way mislead. Unfortunately, that's one of the reasons scientists, we often don't make very good communicators, is we write for a very, very specialized audience who knows a particular context and history and jargon. And I mean, if you wrote an article for a medical journal and said, "Did we find a cancer cure?" ? You not only would a reputable medical journal not publish that if you didn't find a cancer cure. If you could and you could prove it, that's great. But if you couldn't, they would never use that headline. And if you did, I think you might lose your job at your medical research center for doing that. We live in a much more fast and loose world once we leave the corridors of science. And I'm not saying all scientists are right or that they follow the rules. I'm just saying that we live in the world where anybody can say anything. And then, but there's another part that I think is very interesting to me, which I see on Reddit, which is my favorite social media observation platform, is that people do not read the story itself. And you see this in the political world, where, as you know, people are triggered by individuals or issues. Someone will post a story, and the story will have one of these sort of multiple interpretations, headlines, or lurid, and the comments splay out by exactly what you'd think. And I just make a stereotype, like, Democrats will say, "Oh yeah, this proves X," and Republicans say, "Nah, this proves Y." And it's clear nobody read the original story. They just read the headline and then plugged in their own story. Well, no matter what the headline says, but the more ambiguous the headline, the more people can make up their own story.
One headline that we did speak about, I think on our last episode on this series, it's, wait, what does Taylor Swift have to do with a serial killer? and even the URL is thecut.com/article/Taylor Swift serial killer theories explained. Like, it almost, like, if you're looking at the URL, it almost makes it sound like she's the serial killer. And she has, like, nothing to do with this story. Like, there was some remains found near one of her houses, the one that is in Rhode Island. You know, a couple hundred yards from her house, like on the beach, they found some body parts. So she's pulled into this story because of that.
I have sympathy for struggling independent content creators. I have sympathy for struggling news organizations. You know, body found near one of Taylor, I'm guessing Taylor Swift has more houses than either of or all of us put together.
It's probably a safe assumption.
I'm not shocked to find Taylor Swift has a beach house, right? You know, superstar has a beach house. You can see how they just couldn't resist doing that. Wow, that's clickbaity.
Okay, now can I give you the opposite approach here? Because there was a couple of remains found in Springfield, Massachusetts, and that's Megan Meredith and that's Joanne Garelli. Megan Meredith, her body was found on April 22nd, and her death is being investigated as a homicide. Also, about a mile away, I believe back in January, a woman named Joanne Garelli was found murdered about a mile away from where Megan Meredith's body was found, also in Springfield, Massachusetts. So those are two that actually could be connected. We don't know how they were killed. We really just have the location connecting them. Just a week ago, there was a man arrested also in Springfield, Massachusetts. 53-year-old Ahmed tried kidnapping a teen at a park in Springfield. Actually, he kind of dragged the kid into the woods off this park in Springfield and raped the boy, actually 17-year-old kid. And then the kid ran home, and this assailant chased him for about a mile. Eventually was arrested and has been charged with rape and kidnapping, and he's being held without bail. But I guess my point is these three incidents all happened in Springfield, and no one's saying, oh, well, they caught the New England serial killer, or, you know, could this be the New England serial killer, or even the Springfield serial killer? It's almost strange to me that people aren't doing that.
Again, there's a host of issues you brought up. One is that the creation of artificial points of contact between logically and forensically unconnected crimes, you could argue interfere with investigation. Let's just say, making this up here, 3 of these murders are connected. Well, then the police would be expending a massive amount of resources. If they really were saying, well, yeah, but all 11 are connected, we have to find somebody who's guilty of all 11, that's diverting time and resources. You think of those detective mystery shows where they've got the big board, right? And they've got the photographs and pieces of evidence labeled, and they're trying to, pull the strings to make the connection that, like, wait a minute, the security guard was on vacation here and he went to the library here. And so that connects him to all 12 of the murders. Well, yeah, but if 9 of those have no connection whatsoever, you're always going to have a faulty conclusion to your investigation. And again, we don't know if it's mythology. And as you say, it could be a reduced fact and a greater mythology, right? It could be there's 3 people who were killed by the same person, but not 56. The police sound like they understand that. If not, the internet doesn't necessarily.
Could it be that they just don't want it to be over?
Yeah, you can see modern journalism, both independent journalism and what's left of industrial journalism. I mean, again, you've looked at historical cases. As long as they can squeeze attention and viewers, if you want to go big conspiracy theory, you've never done a show on the Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia, or have you?
I don't think we've ever focused on it for a whole episode.
We've mentioned it, and we're very fascinated by it.
So I saw a documentary recently, and if I were running a documentary film festival, I would have given this guy a prize. He's an Irish filmmaker who lives in California, and he did a really, really good documentary. It's called An Unknown Compelling Force, about the Dyatlov Pass incident. And he flew out there. I think this was before the war. This documentary went through each of the major theories or hypotheses about what happened. God bless him. He came up with, we don't know. None of them pan out. All of them have big flaws in them. All of them can't explain all the deaths. Now, this is where we get to each one of them died differently. It may have been one thing, or it may have been 7 things, but the point is they all died, right? So you have to come up with an explanation for all the deaths. You can't just say, well, I'm going to ignore 6 of the deaths and they're unrelated. No, they were all in the hiking group together. So the deaths have to be related somehow, although different causes might have happened. I mean, I'm not going to go into that because it's too deep a dive, although I think it would be great for you guys to have this filmmaker on to talk about this. But in any case, no explanation or multiple explanations satisfies explaining all of the deaths. And these are people who were within a couple 100 feet of each other, who all died probably within hours of each other, and were all in a group together. There's got to be a conspiracy theory. I mean, it could be a natural conspiracy theory, or it could be humans, but I'm just saying that for this, we've talked about this, it's our natural inclination in the way our brain works is that we want to find patterns, right? You two are good at your job because you find patterns. I think the only thing that's going to happen here, I mean, if nothing happens, is that there's going to be Facebook groups that are going to be around forever, just like the Black Dahlia Facebook group or the Jack the Ripper Reddit group. But there'll be some new, the Mid-Atlantic serial killer or something like that. Something new will come along.
Yeah, at some point there's going to be a confirmed serial killer in New England. And then, I wonder which of the these victims that we've spoken about will be pulled into that, or if that would even happen. I guess it depends when. Certainly could be rolled into a story in the future.
So the latest one that was found, the latest body that was found is Adriana Suazo. And she was found in this town that has been described as on the outskirts of Boston, but it's on a good day a 20-minute drive. It's about 10 miles away. So it's described as on the outskirts of Boston, and she was found in a wooded area off of a pretty busy road, a road that is also pretty populated. And there is an article on this website, theroot.com, and it's the first one that I've seen connecting the bodies based on race. And they go into the detail of Adriana Suazo and at least 3 other women of color. And I'm wondering now, is this something that you think is going to start to gain some momentum? They're not all black women. There are white men who have been found deceased in various forms. There's also white women who were found deceased in various forms. But this is a narrative, and I'm not saying it's a good or bad narrative, but it's the first one that I've seen that's actually saying, hey, here's a connection that we can look at.
Just to note, there's a few that we don't know their race or gender.
Just remains that have been unidentified.
Well, wasn't it? Yeah, the weathered human skull. I mean, and I'm sure with modern DNA, they probably did identify at least some genetics, even from that. I am not knowledgeable enough about serial killers. You've had people on who actually study serial killers. Is it the case, and this is a stereotype from television, that I'm an expert on, stereotypes from television, is a stereotype from television that serial killers are looking for victims of either a certain type, a certain demographic, it could certainly be race or gender. They're looking for people in a certain situation. It could be, people in the woods, could be people with certain kinds of vulnerability. That's the TV stereotype when the detectives are staring at that big board there. What ties all these victims together? It could be they were all nurses. It could be they were all Asian women over 40. In the people that you've talked to, is that necessarily always the case, that there's a pattern?
I don't think that's necessarily always the case. And I think one of the top reasons why people are targeted by serial killers is opportunity. So you mentioned all nurses. I think that's sort of an anomaly if it's all one thing. And we've spoken with victims and we've spoken with law enforcement, and what ultimately comes down to being the most common denominator is opportunity. You get a truck driver who's going into bad parts of a city so that they can pick up a sex worker. And I don't think they're really looking at a sex worker and saying, well, I don't want that one because that one is Asian or that one's white. I think it's the opportunity of who looks the most vulnerable.
And you were mentioning also location, right? Like you've done some shows about highway killers who, for work or for looking for victims, rode up and down a particular highway that they knew that there was a case of Native American women who often had to hitchhike on a particular highway that you did a very good show on. Opportunity sometimes creates patterns in victims, as in younger or poorer people being ones who are hitchhiking. I'm probably not going to ever be in a hitchhiking situation, so I'm excluded from the pool of people who are vulnerable. Now, I'm not being facetious about that. I'm just saying that the people who hitchhike, at least in 2025, probably fall into a certain demographic categories.
Yeah, demographic and also the opportunity, because there's just a couple of reasons why you'd hitchhike. And one is that you're a transient person, which is what you're saying, right? Somebody who's moving on from point A to point B and moving on again. Or like your car broke down and you need to get to some place that you can get help. Not a whole lot of other reasons, I don't think, that people would be hitchhiking. That
even with that, if your car was broken down in 2025, would you hitchhike?
No.
Probably not.
I would wait until a cop drives by.
Hitchhiking was a norm. I mean, you should have a guest to do like the history of hitchhiking. When hitchhiking became dangerous, right? Certainly up through the 1960s, you see television shows and movies all the time where people are happily hitchhiking. Now, I'd have to be being chased by an actual serial killer.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I want to get back to this like content clickbaity headline. There's one thing that was bugging me when we were looking into this. It was a recap of all of the people who were found, all of the deceased bodies that were found, following the story of the latest one that was found in Milton, Massachusetts. I just want to read this line. I don't really want to give this person any attention. I don't want to increase their viewership, but maybe I should because you said that journalism is a dying breed. So yeah, go ahead and check out the Toronto Sun and Brad Hunter. He's the one that wrote this. He's written a bunch of other crime stories. There are moments like this in his article where he lists out some details about previous bodies that were found. We had covered this early on, and we talked about Suzanne Wormser, and she was dismembered and put in a suitcase. And then we did a follow-up episode when details came out, and it turns out that Suzanne Wormser was actually murdered by her roommate, Donald Koffel. It had been over a dispute of $200 of drug money. He was charged with this. He was incarcerated before he died while being incarcerated. So that shouldn't be in the conversation anymore. He was charged with this. But in this article by Brad Hunter, he writes, on March 19th, cops were confronted by the gruesome discovery of the dismembered remains of Suzanne Wormser, 58, stuffed in a suitcase in Groton, Connecticut. Last line of this whole description is, a roommate was arrested but died later in custody. Doesn't even give a name, so you can't even Google this. No details on him, but died later in custody. Almost makes it seem like a roommate was arrested and, I don't know, maybe it was police brutality. I'm just saying, like, he just leaves it so open-ended when the detail is already there. He could have put a little link there. A roommate was arrested. Put a little embedded link to an article about it so people can find out.
Yeah, you could probably close the loop on him, too, Donald Koffel being connected to other murders, too. He was pretty, he died of cancer, I believe. So I think he was in his 70s at that point. So probably not out there on a murder spree in the last few months of his life, you know. But I will say, if he is excluded from these articles, wouldn't people wonder where that part is?
I mean, like, excluded in a way where he could say, for more information on this, here, you know, he could link to another article. Not physically omitted, I guess.
I think this is also what I mean by sort of the rules of context. I want to read just the first couple paragraphs of the article that you're referring to. Behind the facades of Cape Cod homes...
I'm so glad you're doing this.
which is where you guys live, right?
Oh,
Cape
we're right on the
Cod,
Cape.
right?
No.
And charming fishing villages where you also live, right?
Yes.
Okay. Evil has long lurked in the shadows of the New England states. Murder just seems creepier in the northeastern United States. I certainly feel that way as a Texan.
Do you really?
Yeah. I mean, just the entire region of New England with all, how many people? Only 10,000 people live in New England, right? I don't know. But
live in fear. You forgot to say live in fear in New England.
And then next, from the Salem witch trials in the 1600s, which you personally were involved in, as I recall, to the Boston Strangler, Lizzie Borden, and Jesse Pomeroy, the world's youngest serial killer. Good job, New England.
Well, that evil gets into you early.
The oldest settlements in the U.S. take a back seat. Well, I think actually St. Augustine, the Spanish were the oldest settlements. But anyway, the oldest settlements in the U.S. take a back seat to no one when it comes to the macabre. Now, like a specter from the Gothic past, a suspected serial killer may be preying on the women of New England. So far, there have been at least 13 mysterious deaths. So first, this is good writing, good Lovecraftian New England.
Also from New England.
Right? Like there's, by the way, nobody's connected these murders to H.P. Lovecraft in Providence, Rhode Island.
We could do that right now if you wanted.
Yeah. If this was a journalism class and a student wrote this in a journalism class, I would say like, okay, there's some issues here. I'm trying to be polite. And again, I understand the pressure everybody's under, but so far, they have been at least 13 mysterious deaths. Well, just off the actual news headlines, half of them are not mysterious. Like the roommate did it or, natural causes or something like that. The specter from the Gothic past, again, it would be a good pitch for a horror movie that there's this, specter who's been killing people in New England for hundreds of years. And did you see that movie with... in fact, obviously the writer saw this movie with Denzel Washington, Fallen.
Oh, when he has the demon in him? Or
That's right, from
yeah, there's an
1998.
actual demon who just takes possession of people and does horrible things. And so...
I see where you're going with it.
I'm not going anywhere with it. But no, I mean... Yeah, you can see the attraction of this. That's all I'll say.
Well, also, it's a bit sloppy historical journalism because he brings up the Salem witch trials, like, duh, that's obvious, when you think of New England and you think of...
And is that unsolved?
Well, I think we know exactly who perpetrated those. But if you're going to say, like, a specter from the Gothic past and you put the words New England and preying on women in New England, he doesn't even bring up the Connecticut River Valley Killer. I mean, that's probably the most well-known New England serial killer that we have, and that's unsolved. Like, he doesn't even go there. Why are you bringing up the Salem witch trials from the 1600s?
And the Boston Strangler. Yeah, and the Boston Strangler, too, which I don't believe he mentioned that there may be more than one or could have been more than one killer sort of mixed up in that Boston Strangler case.
Yeah, he only posts the headline that identifies DeSalvo. I don't know, do like a quick Wikipedia on that and you start to understand that there's a little bit more involved with that.
This is, I feel, and I've talked to journalists a lot on this question, I think they feel under pressure to use this sort of writing style and writing content style where they do state facts, but leave them to the level of interpretation that sort of still gets the mystery pumped up. So cops have torpedoed the notion that a single perpetrator is stalking New England. So that is factually correct. That's like this little diamond of fact here, right? For starters, detectives have pointed to the paucity of forensic evidence. And then they have a quote from the Connecticut State Police, speculation has been fueled by, quote, internet rumors. But then the reporter says, then again, they are the bodies. Now, remember, the police are using the bodies as evidence that there's no connection. But the reporter is making the statement as if the bodies are contradicting that.
But hey, you can't argue with the bodies. They keep piling up.
That's the other thing. Again, you guys are experts in this because you've done this a lot of times before, is that the piling up part, people just are unaware of how many missing and murdered people there are in the United States of America. And in a hugely densely settled area like a lot of New England is, that has like woods. I mean, one of the things about your area is that you'll have a major population center and then a couple of miles of woods. I would be shocked if they didn't do a search of the woods near anybody's home and find something, right? Because, yeah, people have been living there for 12,000, 20,000 years.
Yeah, but don't do a search of my home. I mean, that'd be fruitless, I promise.
It'd just be a waste of time, waste of resources.
Definitely a waste of resources. David, before we do wrap this fascinating conversation up, I just wanted to give the GoFundMe page. So the latest individual who was found deceased, Adriana Suazo, her family has put up a GoFundMe page, and it is titled "Help Us Lay Adriana Suazo to Rest with Love." And you spell that last name Suazo. And they are trying to raise $13,000 so that they can afford the funeral and all of the expenses that come with that, the burial expenses that come with that. They're pretty close, $12,440 as of this recording right now on June 17th. We'll put the link in the show notes. And it was started by her sister, Melanie, who in some articles has been quoted as saying that she does believe that her sister's death is suspicious. And she wants to know who is, if anyone, is responsible for this as well. So maybe this is an open call out to Melanie. If they hear this, we're more than happy to have you join the program as well if you think that that would help. And the GoFundMe campaign for Paige Fannin is still active as well. And that is in loving memory of Paige Elise Fannin. And that middle name is spelled Aliehs.
That's great for you to do that. I mean, we've talked from the very beginning, including about the Maura Murray case especially, but some of the others, about the difficult position families are often in, where families are not monolithic, right? There might be different members of the family that have different opinions, right? And then second, they may be in the position where they feel their case is not getting enough attention, and so they want attention, but the right kind of it, how they define attention. And they may have an agenda themselves. Yeah, I mean, it's always complicated, but the role of, as I guess our tagline for these sessions where I come by to chat with you, is that the media make the murder in some ways, that they define what a case is long before the courts get involved.